Today, we have a special guest with us. We have Kendra Nielsen. Kendra is an LPC therapist, and she's been married to a therapist as well for 20 years. And she's also the podcast host of Fulfillment Therapy. Welcome, Kendra, to the Dr. Wyatt Show podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's start with your background. Fill us in on what made you get interested in marriage, couples.
Well, that is a loaded question. I think it just kind of happened naturally. I wasn't sure if I wanted that to be my focus, but I realized when I worked with couples that it was a very quick way to help families and communities improve. When you help couples, it changes the whole family dynamic, and it's the fastest way to help as many people as possible. So that is one thing that I really love about it. The variety is really fun too. I work with individuals a lot, especially with things concerning marriage and parenting. So it all kind of connects, and I love that part of it. I love being able to help people become their best selves.
I like the way that you connected that, where the more you help couples, the more that helps the community and the larger family. So it's like the fastest path to making the biggest impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When I was an undergrad, my desire was to help as many people as possible. At the time, I decided to major in international affairs, thinking, oh, I'm going to learn about the world and all these people. And then not until I graduated, I decided to help people more on the one-on-one scale. But it started with that heart, which is, how do I make the biggest impact?
Absolutely. Sometimes I feel like I'm like, am I helping enough people? You just never know, and you hope you are,
Yeah,
but you lean in
sure.
anyway.
You can't control the outcome, right? So all we can do is provide the best skills possible as clinicians, and then the rest is in their lap. That's a tricky balance also.
You say that because I often tell my clients that, but I think I'm just as often reminding myself of that.
Yes. Okay, so let's see here. My first question for you is, what are your top recommendations on how couples can build healthy relationships?
That is a wonderful question. I like to think about patterns. I'm all about patterns. And the more I work with clients, the more I start to notice the same things coming up. Also, in my marriage, being married to a therapist for 20 years, we have a lot of interesting conversations where we like to analyze the things that we have going on in our marriage because that's what we both geek out about. But I think for me, it comes down to the trifecta. For me and my clients and my husband, it comes down to boundaries, communication, specifically assertiveness and ownership. But those are major things that I work on my clients with. If you can really dial in on those three things, there's major growth that happens in definitely in a marriage, but in any relationship.
So you said this trifecta. How do you define communication, ownership, and what was the third one? Boundaries.
Well, that is like an episode, each one in itself. So you want me to go through each one?
Maybe a synopsis, the bottom line of each one and what that means.
Okay, let's start with communication. So assertiveness, I found that a lot of my clients feel like they're being really assertive. Like I think about back even when I was first married, and I remember being so frustrated because in all of our disagreements and talking about it later, like, no, I said all of those things. And it came out more and more over time that I wasn't being nearly as assertive as I thought. I was being maybe a little passive and then eventually way more aggressive even than I wanted. And there wasn't that middle ground of really standing up for yourself in like a calm and direct way. You know, there's certain things that everybody knows about, like good eye contact, confident posture, those types of things. But then there's other things too, like using I statements, for example. I'm trying to think of the main things that I talk about: being calm but firm, or actively listening, or another big one, especially for women, practicing saying no and seeing yourself as an equal with other people in the family. For example, a lot of my clients, just culturally in the area that I'm in, see themselves as less than, and at least their actions are showing it, because they won't invest in their own interest, but they will in their kids or their husband. I'm just saying women for now, because that's several of the people I'm thinking about at the moment. When it comes to turning it around, they're not as willing to advocate for themselves and say, yeah, I matter too. I matter equally as my spouse or as my children. So I'm going to invest time and effort into myself as well, being assertive in that way. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I misspoke. I said communication, but you're saying assertiveness is one of these three for the trifecta. The way it sounds like you're describing that is partners learning to be vocal about what their thoughts are, their feelings, their needs, and avoiding the two extremes of being passive or overly aggressive. Is that right?
Absolutely. Assertiveness is so tightly wound with communication. It is communication. It's just that direct communication. And we all have so much room to grow, I feel like. And we think we have it really honed in. I learn constantly that I don't have it honed in as much as I thought I did.
So it's like direct gentleness is what I hear you describing. As far as my experience with couples work is it is easy to fall on one of those ends of the continuum, either stuffing it and kind of holding things in or bottling up and then getting too aggressive, too assertive, and it all comes out at once. And
Mhm.
so I appreciate what you're saying, which is learning to get in touch with what are our feelings and needs and thoughts, and then being able to express it in that middle of calm and direct.
Yeah. Second one is ownership. My husband and I both
Okay.
really enjoy talking about that one
Okay.
because it is kind of self explanatory. It's like living above or below the line. Are you going to act or be acted upon? Are you going to move that ownership ladder, or are you going to stay down in that cycle of being a victim? Is it going to be that fixed mindset, or is it going to be that victim mentality? I have all these different identifiers of if you're above or below the line, which I won't go into all of them now, but it's almost like that fixed mindset in that victim mentality or that growth mindset in that ownership mindset. And all these different ways that we're constantly going above and below the line. But where real growth happens is when we choose to go above that line and really take ownership. I'm not saying if your spouse does something and screams at you that you're taking ownership for that. I was saying you can always own your side of the street. Like what happened in that conversation where you know you could have done better. For example, if you called him a name or something like that, I shouldn't have called you a name and really escalated that conversation. And yet I'm not going to take ownership for you yelling, that type of thing.
Yeah, and you just answered my question because I was going to ask you to clarify how are you defining ownership and what does it look like to go above the street or go above? But it sounds like what you're saying is any kind of tension or conflict for each partner to think about what did I just do that made that worse? How did I contribute to that dynamic? Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, absolutely. And that
Yeah.
also took me quite a while in early marriage. And then I saw my husband really modeled wonderful ownership and better apologies. That's something I had to learn later in life and still learning it, to be honest, but
Yeah.
really come far in that. And I love teaching that to my clients. And with that is proper apologies. A lot of people think they're doing a great job with that. The self awareness just comes the longer you work on these things and the longer you've been married. But yeah.
Sure, sure. I definitely resonate with that. And that's one of the things I teach on a lot as well is ownership because it's so easy to justify our behavior because of what our partner just said and did. Like, well, I wouldn't
Mhm.
have said that if you wouldn't have said this, right? A lot of that kind of logic. But under that logic, you're never responsible for your behaviors, your choices.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I try to help couples with as well, which is no matter what your partner says and does, it's a choice with how you respond back. And that choice is what you can own.
Absolutely.
What about boundaries? How are you defining boundaries? What does that look like?
Now that one is a tricky one. No matter how many times I teach it to people, it's hard to go through it and help them be like, oh yeah, I got it. We have to go through it over and over. That's the one I would need like maybe one or two episodes on. But how can I say that succinctly even now? This is where you can identify your personal limits and your needs. It's helpful to have some self-awareness about your unmet needs, but that takes often help, a third party. I find a lot of people need that. Sometimes they don't. But this also ties into the other things I talked about, like being assertive, that respectful communication, and that ownership. This is about learning to break it down to what you really want and just being able to say that in a concise way so that you can set that and then you can also maintain maintain it. If it's really ambiguous, it's hard to uphold. So clearly communicate that. And you see how all these are connected. And then also have that ability to be flexible while also not being a pushover. So there's so many different aspects of boundaries that are hard to navigate. And I have discovered that culturally, uh, in America, we're not very great at setting and maintaining boundaries.
Yeah, it sounds like it may show up a little different with parenting and with your partner, but it sounds like the origin or the principle is similar, which is it almost reminds me of how much to give and how much to not give. If I'm over giving, then I'm losing me. If I'm not giving enough, then it's all about me. It sounds like what you're describing is kind of striking that middle ground of like when it comes to parenting, it'd be authoritative, not authoritarian, but also not permissive. I'm in the middle, I'm authoritative. Then with our partner, it sounds like I'm willing to be sensitive to their needs while also I need to be mindful of mine. So I'm not losing myself. And I'm also not just making it all about myself.
Exactly. I love the way you put that. Thanks for
Okay.
summarizing that so beautifully.
I mean, I can definitely resonate. One question I do have, and I know it's not in our list of questions, but you mentioned you're married to a therapist. What are the
Uh-huh.
pros and cons of being married? I'm married to a therapist as well, by the way. From your experience, what are the pros and cons of being married to another therapist?
This may not be the answer you'd expect, but I often complain to my friends. Sometimes I just want to talk about the weather. I do not want to talk about case studies or your clients as if you are a client. I just miss small talk. I don't know if you ever have that in your marriage, but sometimes we just go too much into it and we use so much jargon that I just miss it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Second part to that question, I don't know if I answered the first part.
Well, yeah, I just asked what are the pros and cons. And so
Oh,
one con it sounds like is we get into the weeds, psychobabble way too much.
yeah.
What's an advantage, would you say, being married to a therapist?
I have really noticed. So we have 4 children, sometimes 5 with exchange students. With that, I feel like my kids are getting such a wonderful advantage of having both of us with slightly different perspectives and personalities, being able to teach them so much more about, say, like emotional regulation or boundaries or ownership or apologies or emotional intelligence that I don't feel like I ever learned, not because my parents are bad people, but they didn't know what they didn't know. I feel like my kids are so much better equipped, have so much more knowledge and the different conversations that were never had for me. And what an advantage that would have been, time will tell how resilient they end up being. But as far as right now, I'm very happy with the results of them being able to have that perspective that maybe others may not have. Now, that's not just patting ourselves on the back. There's other disadvantages sometimes as well, but I love that perk of having us both be therapists.
Yeah, that's a great point. That makes sense too, that you both can really care for your kids in unique ways because you're both trained on how to have mental health. For all the couples listening, what would you say are your top takeaways that you could, if you had a magic wand and they could make a shift in their relationship or a shift in their mindset, a shift in their behavior, what would be that top takeaway you would love for couples to have?
That is a tricky one. Let's see if I can answer it as concisely as possible. I'd say that just to remember that you're probably not as assertive as you think or setting and maintaining those boundaries as effectively as you may think. And it's not about this blame thing, it's just recognizing those patterns, those maladaptive things that maybe you're doing. Like, yeah, I need to learn more about boundaries or maintaining those things or being more assertive. Now I can spend my time and energy course correcting and making those micro adjustments. And I know that if I can focus on that assertiveness, those boundaries, that ownership, if I can really hone in on those things, that's what will take my relationship to the next level. Those tiny course corrections will help me along that path instead of just residing in shame and being like, I'm never going to get out of this. This is going to be so hard. So that's as concise as I can make it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, so it sounds like baby steps to dig yourself out of a hole. If you've been used to being passive and not standing up for yourself and you've kind of lost yourself, instead of just resigning, slowly starting to take baby steps to regain your voice and your identity in your marriage.
Absolutely.
Kendra, if people wanted to find out more about you, get in touch with you, what's the best channel for you?
So they can go to fulfillmenttherapy.org, or you can find me on anything under fulfillment therapy on all podcasts and social channels, all of those things. That's where they can find me.
Thanks for being with us today, Kendra.
Thanks for having me.